Today, I just wanted to introduce everybody to the newest member of the Shelf family. His name, you might know it, and he will just be sitting right over there. So, welcome to Jeffrey over there. So, hello everybody. My name is Ian Kirkpatrick. I'm an author and robot, and today is going to be a super chill book review. As you can see, I don't have a background. I think I was mostly just too lazy to pull out the green board, and also it's not as formal as I usually do with like a whole markdown of everything because it's a nonfiction, and it's generally not the same level of trackable as when you're doing a fiction. And it's more, you get the takeaways from the book by reading the stories. I don't know. With fiction, you also get the takeaways by reading the stories because you kind of see how stuff is working out. But with the things that I like about a book, you get those through reading the thought processes of the author, specifically in nonfiction. So I don't necessarily think that I can catalog a nonfiction review the same way I typically do a fiction review. Anyway, before we get started, number one, if you enjoy what I do on this channel, please remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Number two, if you would like to be featured on this channel, check out the two links in the description below, Lemoy and PitchFit, for different ways to be featured here. And number three, if you would like to get a copy of my forthcoming satire, Boom Boom Boom, at least the arc, check out the NetGalley and and the Book Sirens links below. Otherwise, I've got two other books out, a satirical horror and a magical realism, if you would like to check those out. Also, Hello Boomer merch, but that's not neither here nor there. So, the book that I just finished reading, finally, I've been carrying it around since December. I am having so many problems right now, you guys. I am not focusing on writing. I am pretty fixated on playing video games. I am pretty fixated on some things right now, and it's not good and mildly depressing. You want to come here, Totley? It's been a pill and a half to get my brain straight. Because it's just unbelievably... oh my gosh. Unbelievable how much I've been focused on this thing. Or how much this thing can affect me. And it's... yeah, let's move on. So the book that I have been carrying around for about 2 months now, maybe more than that, is Whoever Fights Monsters by Robert Ressler and Tom Schachtman, mostly Robert Ressler, and he is known as one of the men that helped to design and create the criminal profiling section bureau of the FBI. He is an FBI agent, or was an FBI agent, and this book specifically covers how he built the criminal profiling section of the FBI, the different things that he did while working for the FBI, and his interviews with a number of infamous and less known serial killers. So some of the names that you might recognize that are in this book, or some of the names that you might recognize that are featured in this book are Richard Chase, Ed Kemper, John Wayne Gacy. I think Ted Bundy is mentioned very briefly, but barely, and Jeff Dahmer is mentioned all the way at the end, in 2 or 3 paragraphs, because this was published in 1993, so Jeff had just been caught in 91. He was finally, I think his trials were finally over in 93 because he died in 94. And I will say, it always throws me off a little when I'm reading something and it's Jeff is still alive and everybody is saying he is this and he is that, and they're making projections for like where it can go in the future. And it's always a little weird. Anyway, you also know when you're getting to the end of this book when he starts talking more and more with the acronyms in general of the different associations and whatnot that he's working on. But it's very interesting. So the first thing, I super enjoyed this book, and I highly recommend reading, especially if you're interested in psychology and maladjusted psychology, criminal psychology. There's always the caveat that, one, these are all anecdotal. This is also somebody's, basically their memoir of a sort. And so it's going to be painted not only with their experiences, but with their own biases for what they want to show and what they don't want to show. So you always have to enter reading anything that is fiction or nonfiction with a level of skepticism and willingness to go, okay, this is the story that Ressler wants to tell right now. And so this is what he's saying, and this is what I'm going to take away from it. And this is the amount of, I'm going to, check information with this or that if I care enough to do that. But as far as I'm concerned, this is the information that I'm getting from Ressler about these situations and his experiences. Now, you do get, one of the things that you'll see if you go and look at reviews on it is some of them mention that he comes off kind of arrogant, and you can absolutely feel that at times. But you know what? I can understand his arrogance, considering the kinds of stuff that he did and the kinds of things that he built, that he would feel confident. So one of the interesting things that he specifically did in this is he said that this was back in the 60s and the 70s, and he determined that there was value in studying and interviewing and understanding criminals. So he spent a lot of time contacting different prisons and trying to get interviews and build relationships with different criminals that were imprisoned, because you get different answers when you actually have something of a relationship, a trust, a respect going back and forth between you and a criminal. And so you get some insights in here. Oh, Manson is in here too. Charles Manson is mentioned in here as well, as a name that you would know. And then there are a couple others in here. There are a number of others in here that are different, like kidnapping cases, murder cases. You get different information, and it can actually help you better understand the mindset of the individual, because when it comes down to these sorts of criminals, they're unique in the way that they mutated from the typical social norms. And that's one of the things that I find completely fascinating, and why I love reading about true crime, specifically about maladjusted individuals. Socially maladjusted individuals is what I'm finding I write and read about a lot. I would even say Joey is socially maladjusted. All things considered, she's not a criminal, I guess. Yeah, she hasn't actually killed anybody. She has stolen things before, but there is that. But I think there's a lot of value specifically in this. If you're curious, if you're ever trying to become a better writer, if you're trying to create more believable and complex characters, I highly recommend finding books like this, or that follow these sorts of people that you're wanting to write about. I write about a bunch of maladjusted people and somewhat criminal people, like Cain and Abel is obviously a rendition of Jeffrey Dahmer, and in Ghost Walks, that kid is a foster home kid that became a thief as an adult. Bodymore has the daughter, the only child and daughter of a very, very abusive alcoholic from a poor house. Dead End Drive is just full of psychopaths. And so I highly recommend that you just pick up different books to better understand, at least get ideas of how thought processes can go. Because nothing is surefire 100%. But understanding the patterns of logic of just how a human psyche can be put together can come through in these sorts of analyses. And then it's interesting, you always have to approach, if you want to create the most complex characters that you can, deep complex characters, is you have to understand the world through those characters' points of view. So if you only write other characters, like external peripheral characters, through the point of view of you, the author, or you, the main character, where everybody else sucks unless you've got the rose-colored eyes for that love interest, and then everybody but the love interest sucks, and everybody but those kissing your ass suck, you're going to have shallow characters. The important thing is that everybody that we come in contact with in our lives, whether it is at the gas pump or if it is in the bathroom, like because they're coming out, you're going, whatever. Wherever you run into people, they have their own goals, their own lives that are going on, their own points of view, their own morality, their own way of seeing things and viewing things that maybe you don't agree with. And this is why I think writing is an ultimate exercise in empathy. To be the best writer that you can be, you have to write characters that you may downright disagree with, but do it believably through their point of view, because these characters who do these things that you don't agree with totally understand and agree with the things that they're doing, and it's not because of the reasoning that you think it is. It's not because they're just evil and they don't care, which is something that I see a lot on social media, is people assuming that others have different ideas on how to deal with things because they don't care, and it's only because they're evil. when really there's a lot more nuance around all of that. And so you get a good idea of that sort of stuff, I think, by studying criminals and looking at these sorts of maladjustments and the way that the brain mutates and the way that social things mutate. And I wanted to read a couple sections in here. So this book, I'm trying to adjust my light so I can read a little better. This book has 12 different chapters. The Vampire Killer is number 1, and that is the killer who was a vampire. There have been a couple of those, but that one's specifically about Richard Chase. Whoever Fights Monsters, which is the name of the book, interviews with murderers, childhoods of violence, death of a newsboy, organized and disorganized crimes. What plus what equals who. I was kind of disappointed with that chapter because I thought it was actually going to go through, here are a bunch of different combinations in which this turned into this sort of person that became a killer, and it didn't really do that. It just sort of was a bunch of anecdotes of a couple different killers. Staging, patterns of deceit, to kill again, ? Tightening the net, 2 for the show. 2 for the show has a specific story of he was setting up a presentation. Ressler was setting up a presentation for the FBI where he was going to interview John Wayne Gacy for 90 minutes and Edmund Kemper for 90 minutes and just let them do their thing. Ask them just basic questions and just let them talk so that the people in the Bureau could just see these people as they are. And it was interesting because apparently Edmund Kemper was very straightforward and he just answered anything that he was basically asked, whereas John Wayne Gacy continued on about his innocence and how they needed to reopen the investigation and go and investigate some of the employees or coworkers that he had living with him to see if they had anything to do with the bodies that were in his basement and that it didn't all end with him and all of that. And apparently some of the FBI agents or the viewers of the presentation were angry that Ressler didn't push back on Gacy more when he was interviewing. But any pushback in that situation would have just destroyed the relationship that Ressler had created with Gacy and then completely destroyed any further hope that he could have had for further interviews, because it's not always helpful to just try to smack somebody else with what your ideas are and your opinions are. In a lot of cases, like this specifically, when you just want them to be open and to be themselves, then you don't want to push back on somebody because you want them to feel safe enough to just talk to you like they will talk to you and not be apprehended for it. Casey was already in jail and he was already sentenced, and so pushback wouldn't have done anything but close off this door of trust that Ressler had tried so hard to create in the first place. So that's an interesting chapter, and you do get quite a bit of information about Edmund Kemper. I don't know of too many books that are about him. If you've got a good recommendation for an Edmund Kemper book, let me know in the comments down below, because I would like a book on him. And then broaden horizons. So tightening the net, I feel like is a chapter that is mostly about building more of the FBI, or building more about his career. So I think my favorite chapter in here, 2 for the show, was interesting because you got so much information with Edmund Kemper specifically, and some with Gacy. And then I think Childhoods of Violence is my favorite chapter in this book because of the insights that come with it. Interviews with Murderers, I think that's the one where he talks to Manson as well as a couple other dudes. But I did want to share some of the information that came in here. And I think what really helps with these sorts of books is it's got the anecdotal of, here is the situation, and here is the crime, here were the victims, here was the scene, here is how we broke this down, this is how it eventually went, this is the history of the criminal, and these are the ways in which we are interpreting how different elements affected how this person went. And I think anecdotes, specifically because these sorts of people are so one-off, but you can still find a pattern in how uniquely they developed into who they became. And that's very interesting. Okay, so from birth to age 6 or 7, studies have shown the most important adult figure in a child's life is the mother, and it is this important period that the child learns what love is. Relationships between our subjects and their mothers were uniformly cool, distant, unloving, neglectful. Over 40% of murderers reported being physically beaten and abused in their childhoods. More than 70% said they had witnessed or been part of sexually stressful events when they were young, a percentage many times greater than the usual found in general population. I slept with my mother as a young child, said one. I was abused by my father from age 14, said another. My stepmother tried to rape me, reported a third. I got picked up downtown one night by some guy when I was around 7 or 8, said a fourth man. So constantly child abuse and sexual trauma do contribute to this. Also, parental relationships heavily influenced a lot of the patients / criminals in this. It is true that most children who come from dysfunctional early childhoods don't go on to be murderers or to commit other violent antisocial acts. As far as we could see, the reason for this is that the majority are rescued by strong hands in the next phase of childhood, that of pre-adolescence. But our subjects were definitely not saved from drowning. They were pushed further under in this phase of their lives. From the age of 8 to 12, all negative tendencies present in their early childhoods are exacerbated and reinforced. In this period, a male child really needs a father, and it is in just this period that the fathers of half of the subjects disappeared in one way or another. Potential murderers become solidified in their loneliness first during the age period of 8 to 12. Such isolation is considered the single most important aspect of their psychological makeup. Many factors go into the fashioning this isolation. Among the most important is the absent father. When there is no father or no father figure present for an 8 or 10 or 12-year-old boy, this is embarrassing for the child in front of his peers. He begins to avoid friends, to avoid situations in which father-son teams are usually present, such as Little League or Boy Scouts. His pre-adolescent sexual activity, rather than being connected with other human beings, starts as autoerotic. Adolescence in these troubled youngsters was dominated by increasing isolation and acting out behavior, with lots of daydreaming, compulsive masturbation, lying, bedwetting, and nightmares as concomitants of the isolation. Their spotty records in school was a pattern that carried over in life. Most were incapable of holding jobs or living up to their intellectual potentials. They were not successful employees and were fired often, involved in disputes at the workplace, and had continual problems with authority. In school, they were either chronically disruptive or subdued and withdrawn to the extent that no one paid them any mind. School systems, as well as families, fail these children too often. Confronted with a problem child, a school system does not get him to counseling, or if counseling is done, it does not address the significant issue in the child's life, especially including those pertaining to a dysfunctional home. In a situation where you find a distant mother, an absent or abusive father, and siblings, a non-interventional school system, an ineffective social service system, and an inability of the person to relate sexually in a normal way to others, you have almost a formula for producing a deviant personality. The ability to initiate, maintain, and develop good interpersonal relationships begins in childhood and is reinforced in the preteen years. But if it isn't there at the beginning and it is not positively reinforced in those preteen years, by the time the boy reaches adolescence, it is too late. Someone on track toward antisocial behaviors can be retracked only so far. The chances are that he will become a largely dysfunctional adult. For him to be reshaped and returned to a normal behavior is unlikely. That means that when these murderers are caught and incarcerated, the prognosis of their rehabilitations is extremely poor. Because, after all, their problems have been developed since their childhood. These are men who have never known how to properly relate to other human beings. It is not likely that such fundamental interpersonal skills can be taught in prison. These men were motivated to murder by their fantasies. It is developmental, getting tired of a certain level of fantasy and then going even further and even more bizarre. It got off in such a deep end that I'm still not exposed to the worst of the fantasies that I have, one killer reported. All of the murderers that were interviewed had compelling fantasies. They murdered to make happen in the real world what they had seen over and over again in their minds since childhood and adolescence. Nobody bothered to find out what my problem was, and nobody knew about my fantasy world, one murderer said. Sexual maladjustment is at the heart of all fantasies, and the fantasies emotionally drive the murderers. Fantasy is defined as a happenstance unattainable in a normal life. The deviant person, having had very few restraints on his behavior since childhood, believes that he can act out his fantasies and that nobody will be able to stop him. The offender's great commitment to their fantasies deepens as they become loners in adolescence. Aggressive with their feelings of having been cheated by society, they channel their hostility into fantasies. Fantasies are characterized by strong visual components and by themes of dominance, revenge, molestation, and control. With these deviant men, the more fantasy fun they have, the more danger their partner is in. Cognitive mapping is the development of thinking patterns that affect how the person relates to himself and to his environment. It determines how the individual gives meaning to the events that happen in his world. The effects of He moves more and more into an antisocial position, viewing the world as a hostile place. He becomes almost incapable of interacting properly with the outside world because his thinking patterns are all turned inward. Designed only to stimulate himself in an attempt to reduce tension, which only reinforces his isolation. A loop is developed. The lonely teenager has abhorrent fantasies and tries partially to live these out by tentative antisocial acts. The lie that is not found out, the cruelty of an animal which does not have any ill effects on his own life, the fire that burns brightly, the frightening of a child that is not reported. He gets away with such acts. The effects of these accomplishments then become incorporated into his fantasies, which are pushed into a more intensively violent level. More retreat from society follows, and eventually so do more experiments with actualizing the fantasies. So the theorizing and the analysis mixed in with seeing the anecdotes and the single situations helps give a lot of context to different ways to interpret, which I think where a lot of the value comes from reading this sort of book and understanding the psychology behind these sorts of people, that you can then take that similar psychology. It doesn't even have to be criminal psychology, but if you can see how the logic sort of connects in these obscure situations, then you should be able to pull it back and apply similar logic just for mapping, like it was talking about, cognitive mapping, not as extreme lives. So I do recommend this book. I thought it was a good read. It had interesting conversations, and I think you get to see stuff about not just a couple of famous serial killers, but a couple of less famous serial killers and the interesting sort of art behind profiling and what's to look for, because at least based on this, and I'm sure because Ressler wrote this, so he's not going to put very instances of which he failed. There was one in here that he talked about. He got that one wrong, but Ressler's ability to profile in this is very interesting, and also it helps break down again to show the different ways that he reads people and the different ways that people develop in predictable ways, because he says, I see this crime scene and the perpetrator is going to be this and this and this and this, and these are the reasons why. And so then it also gives you information. So if you're writing in the future about a situation, what all things to think of when you're creating a situation, what is on that character's mind. Like, he could tell when a killer was often disorganized because they were going to live within a certain mile radius, because the disorganized killer is very impulsive and doesn't have control, didn't pre-plan anything, and often they don't drive a car. And so they were going to be within a couple of miles of the kill sites typically. And so you learn all of these different, or you at least see in practice, all of these little different things that he was thinking of when he was profiling. And I think that does a lot to help understand better the state of mind somebody was in when they were somewhere and how they worked and the decisions they make. And that connects directly with the way that I write, which is being in the moment with the character. What is around them? What do they need now? And what do they have at their disposal? What do they need to be wary of? What's going to step in front of them? And this is sort of backwards engineering that. So this review was kind of all over the place because it was really just talking about generally the book and then sharing some excerpts. And if you're interested in this, go pick it up and enjoy. I also felt like it was probably time to do a book review where I enjoyed the book, so there is that. I'm looking forward to your thoughts. Have you read this book, or do you read psychology books or true crime books or any of those sorts of things to inform your writing, or because you just have an interest in the genre, the subject matter? I'm looking forward to your comments below. With all that said, thank you so much for watching. Have a great weekend and don't die.
Was that Wayland Cross in the trunk? Do you know, or is that something that's still being figured out?
The person in the trunk was not Wayland Cross.
Is he in trouble?
We don't know who did it, but as the owner of the car, the longer he's missing, the worse it looks for him.
Cross isn't a killer. For the last couple of years, the average number of murders in Baltimore has been over 300, and it's been going up. Mind you, that's only whatever the badges count as official murder, and believe me, there are people that don't count when they die. Wayland? If you're down here, tell me. I'm not talking to the badges, I've been looking for you. They found a body in your trunk. Why? Did you do that? To the left. Plain black letters read along the wall. You walked in the corridor. Once that ends, you chose the dark is on the right. My vision goes blurry, flickers black and black and black for longer intervals until I can't see anything at all. I'm not screaming anymore, but my voice echoes back to me. Where the hell am I? You're dead, Josephine. Even smart people do stupid shit sometimes, right?